Welcome back to Voices of the Regenerative Decade. I'm Becca Dakini, your host, and we're extremely excited to be hosting some amazing voices of the regenerative decade today on One Earth Live. So I'd like to welcome our next guests on this panel. The panel is entitled, How Can We Best Succeed in this Decade of Planetary Regeneration? And we're very lucky today to have amazing guests with us, such as Amanda Ravenhill, Joe Brewer, Dr. John Liu, Lyla June, Osprey Orielle Lake, and Jonathan Foley. So welcome to all of you today. Thank you so much for being here with us. I would love for you to introduce yourself and a little bit about your work. And I'll start with you, if that's okay, Amanda, JOY Ravenhill from Buckminster Fuller Institute.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having us here, Becca. My life mission is to paint a picture of the future that is just and regenerative, and ensure that people can see the future that we want. And so I worked for a while in biochar, which then led me to co-founding Project Drawdown 7 years ago. And then I moved over to here to be with Buckminster Fuller Institute 3 years ago. And we are launching a program called Regenerosity, which is all about increasing the velocity of capital to regenerative projects around the world. Honored to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Across to you, Joe Brewer.
Oh, hi, Becca. It's lovely to be here. I'm Joe Brewer, and I'm the director of the Center for Applied Cultural Evolution. And my personal passion is to help humanity make its way through the sustainability bottleneck that we're in right now. And I'm really driven by the desire to keep humans alive on the planet and avoiding extinction as a possible extreme negative outcome of where we're going at the moment. And I've really spent a lot of time over the last 20 years helping people apply the best knowledge from kind of scientific and academic research to help guide large-scale social change efforts. And I'm just delighted to be here with this wonderful group of people today.
Thank you so much, Joe. Across to you, Jonathan Foley.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us all here today. What a great group. I'm John Foley. I'm a scientist. I've been working for the last, 30 years on issues related to climate change. And then I worked a lot in deforestation and kind of global agriculture, mostly in the academic world. But then I have a real passion for science communication and spent a bunch of years running a science museum. And then got to succeed Amanda Ravenhill, actually as the director of Project Drawdown, filling some rather large shoes there. Where some of this science and science communication comes together about how we can collectively stop climate change.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Osprey, Orielle Lake, across to you.
Hi, everyone. It's a real honor to be here with this wonderful group of folks, so thanks for having me. I'm the executive director and founder of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN. And I got involved with really working on these issues because I saw, as many now studies are showing more and more, that there's a really powerful nexus between solving the climate crisis and actually now also the COVID-19 pandemic and women's leadership. So that's really the focus of my work over the last 10 years. And I'm really excited to be working with amazing women in the Amazon rainforest, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, reforesting, to projects across North America, working on the front lines with Indigenous women, women of color, and really understanding that we have to have an intersectional lens right now to really solve a lot of these world's problems. So really excited to be here and have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Osprey. Across to you, John Liu.
Well, thank you for the honorary doctorate. I have to be accurate here. Let's see, I'm a filmmaker, was a journalist, and about almost 30 years ago, I started to document the rehabilitation of China's List Plateau. And so I saw that it was possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. I founded the Ecosystem Restoration Camp movement, which now has 20 continents and is growing very rapidly. So I am certainly honored to be in this esteemed group, and hope we'll have a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I am Becca Dakini, your host for today. I'm an international executive event producer and project manager, completely focused on creating programs and projects and platforms in service to planetary solutions and particularly the regenerative movement. It's an honor to be able to bring you together and platform these conversations, which I think the world very much needs to hear at this time. So thank you for being a part of One Earth Live with us today as we have these important conversations together. So I'd love to move on to our first question for today's panel, which is, how can we best succeed in this decade of planetary regeneration? Joe, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, I think one thing that we really need to grapple with to be able to succeed in any way at the challenges that we're dealing with is we need to really support people through the emotional strain and difficulty of what it means to really take in the scale of our planetary predicament. And as we do that, we learn things like how to slow down and take care of ourselves, and how to connect to landscapes, and learn how to be human again in our environments. I feel like our best chance for getting through this decade is to come back to the most honest and, what is best, understanding of what it means to be human, which includes, among other things, the capacity to experience awe and wonder, and to act in service to things that we love. I feel like in this time when a lot of sacred things are either in jeopardy or may soon be lost, that we really need to hold into this space that makes humans so special and so wonderful in the world.
Thank you so much, Joe. Across to you, John.
Yes, well, I think that, you know, a decade is a good idea, but it's not long enough. We're going to have generations of people who work in service of restoring ecological function on the planet. We've had a very long human history, which has been fairly destructive, and now in a decade, we're not going to be able to completely reverse that, but we can get it started. And if we don't, then I think we are going to see some very, very serious consequences very soon.
Okay, thank you, John. And across to you, Amanda.
Before we even have kind of like irons.
I have a little bit of background noise. I'll go in a minute.
Okay, no problem. Osprey, you're up next.
Yeah, I would just add in, you know, echoing a little bit on that too. I think that what's really important, I know strategically in how we work and a lot of our network, is to have both long-term and short-term goals, because, you know, a lot of the work that we do on a daily basis and our organization at WeCan is respond to, you know, urgent crisis of climate and COVID-19 pandemic right now. And that can be everything from, you know, ensuring that, you know, frontline communities have the equipment and the equipment that they need on a daily basis, to, you know, reforesting damaged lands, to protecting things that are under attack, like right now in the United States. The Trump administration's trying to roll back something called RODIS rule, which would open up the national Tongass rainforest to deforestation and mining. There's all these issues I know we're very involved in that are very immediate in our communities, or trying to protect biodiversity, protect water, protect the climate. So I feel like we need to really understand, you know, what the struggles are in our local communities, or, you know, whatever regions we work in. But at the same time, we need a much deeper analysis so that we're not just darting from one crisis to another, but to also have a really deep, both spiritual, philosophical, economic, and political analysis. And there's not time on this short panel to go into that, but I would just really encourage people to really understand that while we're really dealing with immediate crises, and we must deal with them and make sure that frontline communities and those impacted the most have the attention that they need, and that we really center those voices of Indigenous peoples and peoples of color and women, that we at the same time realize there's a much bigger agenda going on. Like, we didn't just get into these crises yesterday. It is a result of how we've been living with each other and Mother Earth for a long time, and that we need to also hold space for this deeper analysis and conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Osprey. Amanda, across to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Osprey. I think, a lot of the work that we do at Buckminster Fuller Institute is looking at whole systems. And part of that is looking at the root causes, like you just talked about. There's so much there around our separation from nature, around othering and colonialism, around avoidance of inner work, like you were mentioning, Joe. We have to be looking at those root causes. And then another element of whole systems is looking at the downstream effects of any one of our intentions. So the best hearts and intentions have gone out there to try to, make the world a better place. And if they're not looking at the indirect effects of the downstream effects, then those can be unintended negative consequences that could be worse than if they hadn't even intervened in the system in the first place. So I'm always a big proponent of what I call cascading benefits, these benefits that can create these positive cycles of value that begets more value, health that leaves more health in its wake. So yeah, whole systems, both root causes and downstream effects, I think are critical in this next decade.
Thanks, Amanda. Across to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, I think it was said before too that this decade is going to be a crucial beginning to building a better, more verdant world, of course. And if we miss this decade, we're really going to be in big trouble. But it's not going to be done in a decade. This is going to be a long, long kind of experience for us to kind of rehabilitate ourselves and the planet. Just think of the dawn of agriculture, which is causing a lot of our problems 12,000 years ago, or the invention of fossil fuels as a primary energy source in the 19th century. We'd be fooling ourselves to think it's only going to take 10 years to fix all this, but we'll get started. But I want to remind ourselves too, I think that, the first rule of getting out of a problem, as they say, is, stop digging. Regeneration is often about filling the hole, but we have to remind ourselves the first job is to stop digging the hole. So I just want to make sure what's not lost in the conversation is while we want to kind of rehabilitate the earth, we have to stop destroying the earth first. And they can be done in parallel in different ways in different places by different people. We don't have time to do one thing at a time. But as we lose continuously more and more rainforest, that seems to be almost more important than planting new forest, or incredibly destructive agricultural practices have to stop while we're kind of finding new ways to do regenerative agricultural practices. And I just want to make sure that's not lost in the conversation. There's, it's about doing less bad as much as it is doing more good. And we don't have time to do one or the other. We have to do them both at the same time. And we should have started 50 years ago, but we can start today.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so moving on to our next question. What are some of the best examples of projects or initiatives you believe can assist us in succeeding in planetary regeneration that you know of, whether that's your own projects or projects that you're tracking? But what do you think it will take? And are there any particular initiatives that you're aware of that you'd like to speak of? Across to you, Joe.
Yeah, one of the things that's been really powerful in the last 50 years and has not been appreciated enough by people is how much we've learned to do with large-scale conservation management, of taking a collapsed fishery and helping to restore it and learn how to manage it as a commons effectively. And what I've seen in my work on bioregional scale regeneration projects is that there is really an incredible capacity to do integrated landscape management. And one set of people that I'd like to draw attention to, and I know they've partnered in some of the work that John Liu is involved in, is Eco-Agriculture Partners, which also works with a group called Common Land Foundation. And what they're doing is developing ways to try to reintroduce regional scale economies that do things like restore the soils, do water catchment and water retention, reforestation, and at the same time create models of economic interaction and exchange that provide viable livelihoods. And there's a fantastic project in the Altiplano of Spain that John could speak to in more detail than I can, but I know that it's roughly 1 million hectares of land, and they're doing regenerative agriculture and building food systems and working on supply chains for the entire region. Similarly, in the Sacred Valley of Peru, there's a project to coordinate the maintenance and regeneration of 5 distinct river valleys, all of which are connected with the Sacred Valley upstream or downstream, where they're working with Quechua farmers and villages to do organic and regenerative farming practices, while at the same time creating sustainable livelihoods. And the impressive scale and complexity of these projects is something that should really inspire us to see what is possible, because the scale of our challenges are huge and the scale of our solutions need to be equally fit to task.
Thank you, Joe. Across to you, John.
Sorry, I'm had to unmute myself. Joe's talking about is the Alvalal Cooperative, which is working together with the Common Land Foundation in Spain. There's also a regenerative academy that's doing studies to follow the monitoring and assessment of that work. I would also add that I think our economy has some which incentivize destruction. So as long as we leave a perverse incentive in place, it's going to be very difficult to have different results. What is that now the existing economy is spasming, is shuddering, it's really in dire straits. And there is a desire, I think, among some to try to go back to business as usual right after this COVID thing. And I think we need to rethink that and realize that we're going to have a complete change. We need to really think about how can we make our economy serve our ecological and our social and our spiritual needs.
Thanks, John. Across to you, Osprey.
Yeah, I'm so much in agreement with that as well. I think that it's true, we need to simultaneously stop bad stuff from happening while we invite good stuff to happen. And I think that the economy's not at the core of all of what we need to change, but it's essential that now that we're in this moment of forced pause, that we really do look at how we're going to have deep structural change in a new economy, because our economy is at war, if you will, with nature. And I saw this wonderful meme on social media. Some of you might have seen it. And someone wrote, "I sort of feel like Mother Earth sent us to our rooms to go think about what we had done." And I think that there's really this incredible moment, and that we need to be very strategic about understanding that, there's a crack in the system right now, and it's burying, for all of us to see the negative consequences of the injustices of our economic system to, quote unquote, marginalized people, to nature, and that we really need to look at systemic change. And I know we're working a lot with different groups on how do we restructure a new economy. I would mention like the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain are doing some really interesting modeling on this. A lot of different groups, the New Economy Network is another one. And I do think we need to get at the heart of it. Some of the immediate work we're doing is actually around divestment, because so much of the economy in the United States and in other countries is based on fossil fuels. And to really meet the Paris Climate Agreement, we have got to keep fossil fuels in the ground. So we work with different groups to, one, stop these terrible bailouts that are happening right now in the US around giving money to the fossil fuel industry, but also directly going after asset managers, bankers, insurance companies, and really demanding that they divest from fossil fuels and invest into renewable, clean energy and all these wonderful futures that we want to have. The last thing I'll say and pass it off is that another initiative in this realm that we're really excited about and have been working on for a long time is called Rights of Nature. And this is also something that can help not just change our relationship with nature and really respect the rights of nature as a rights-bearing entity, but also can influence our economy, because it would really prevent us from doing activities personally or at the corporate level or at the federal level that would harm Mother Earth. So I think there's a lot of really exciting work around rights of nature that also could be really useful at this time.
Wonderful, thank you, Osprey. Across to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on maybe it's I'm sure it'll be a question later too, given the times we're in. But it's so bizarre the time we're living in during this coronavirus pandemic. But I just want to just maybe throw out there the kind of parallels between the coronavirus pandemic and climate change are very, very interesting, because they both have a kind of systemic root cause of we're breaking down our physical climate system. We're kind of causing it to be disrupted in ways that haven't been seen in millions of years. And that's happening slowly. We're kind of, breaking down our normal atmosphere's carbon budget and the ocean's carbon budget, and it's kind of acting out of control. What does it do when it does that? It kind of lashes out, throwing more severe storms at us, more, severe hurricanes, deeper and longer fire seasons. So the storms of our physical planet are a result of us breaking it down. Pandemics are kind of like a biological storm, and they're happening because we're breaking down nature's normal harmonious relationships. Normally, viruses and their kind of host organisms and the vectors that keep them moving around are kind of contained within nature, and they're kept away from us. But as we break down natural ecosystems, tearing down rainforest, eating too much bushmeat, having crazy traditional medicine trades that are killing wild animals, and also confined agriculture with millions of farm animals near millions of people with poor regulation, what happens? We unleash viruses which humans have never experienced before, causing these kind of biological storms. So it's kind of interesting to me, is kind of the slow, steady breakdown of the biology of our planet and the slow, steady breakdown of the physics of our planet are both unleashing, if you will, the equivalent of storms into humanity. And we're going to pay the price for that. And just like climate change, scientists have been warning about these emerging pandemics for about 40 years as well. In fact, they've been screaming at the top of their lungs, and policymakers and business leaders didn't want to hear it, just like climate change. But the thing what's really nice is the root causes are similar, but also the root solutions. They're, first stopping the harm, stop digging the holes, but then to rehabilitate our oceans, our atmosphere, and our biosphere to a more natural way of doing things. And the keys to that are in energy and our agricultural systems. And we know that now. That's the beauty of all this, is we actually do know where the solutions might be and where to begin, especially the doing less harm part of it. That's the obvious part. The doing more good, we have a lot more to learn from nature, and nature is a hell of a lot better engineer than we'll ever be. So I think it's kind of interesting to draw these parallels. I hope we get to discuss that later. But what world will we have after this pandemic is a really very, very interesting question, because it's going to affect everything. And but most of all, I hope it teaches us some humility, teaches us to respect that natural systems are actually good for human systems, that we don't have to be in conflict with them. If we are in conflict with natural systems, we lose the conflict. And we can learn something from this. It's a terrible, terrible human tragedy of what's happening now. Was fully avoidable and preventable, but we didn't do it. And we need to learn this lesson so that others in the future won't suffer the same fate. But we can, and that's the good news.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Jonathan. I would love to introduce a special guest panelist that's just dropped in to join us live. Lyla June Johnson, thanks for joining us. I'm wondering if you would like to say a few words just about your work in the regenerative movement and just about you in general.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'll introduce myself in my native tongue first. My name is Lyla June, and I'm from the Black Charcoal Street Division of the Red Running Into Water clan of the Dene Nation. My father's mother is a Cheyenne clan. My mother's father is a Salt clan of the Dene Nation, and my father's father is the Scandinavian clan. And I'm from Taos, New Mexico, And in that manner, I introduced myself as a Dene woman, also incorrectly known as Navajo. So I'm just really grateful to be here with all of you and just glean what I can from your beautiful minds. I've already learned so much. I've only been here a few minutes. And I guess where I fit into the conversation perhaps is, well, one way is my doctoral research that I'm pursuing at the moment, which is all about indigenous land management and indigenous food systems and the intersection of those two things, and really trying to break out of the box of food that we were raised with, which is that it comes from farms and everything else is wild. And so for me and my people, the wild and the domesticated overlapped in some ways. For instance, the Shawnee of Kentucky, if we look at the fossilized pollen in Kentucky ponds, we see that about 3,000 years ago, all of the cedar and hemlock go away, and you have this advent of black walnut, hickory nut, chestnut, and acorn. And you also see the advent of fossilized charcoal, because the Shawnee ancestors managed these forests with low intensity burns every year. And so we were some of the first prescribed burners, and we did them very methodically and gently. That same is true for a lot of indigenous nations throughout the world. And especially in California, where we see these catastrophic fires are not only due to the effects of climate change, but also to the effects of colonization, of removing the original stewards of the land, such that the land gets overgrown, the land gets weakened in their immune systems because there's too many trees per acre, and they're all fighting for limited nutrients and water. And so fire was a really important tool also for sculpting the Great Plains as we know it. One of the elders said, if you see the deer looking hungry, do a small burn, a low intensity burn at the right time of year. And that turns the debris instantly into phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen, which is really bioavailable to the grasslands. And so you have these grasslands that are highly nutrient dense shoot up, and then the deer are attracted to that. So a lot of people say we followed the buffalo, which is somewhat true, but also the buffalo followed us and our burning practices. And these low intensity burns actually enhance the biodiversity of the Great Plains. Same is true for the Mardu in Western Australia and many other places around the world where fire was a gentle, helpful pressure. Another example is the Xiuhtezcatl Nation in the British Columbia, the island of Bella Bella. They hand plant kelp forests along the shoreline, and this increases the surface area for the spawning grounds for the herring fish, which lays its eggs throughout. So these human beings actually have a very direct impact on increasing the biomass that is available to the whole food web, including the salmon, the killer whales, the wolves, the bald eagles. Everything feeds off of ultimately this foundation of the herring roe, the herring eggs. And so human beings in this continent were actually far more advanced than we think they are. We're not primitive, stupid savages, turns out. We're actually highly sophisticated ecological scientists, which are responsible for a large portion of the food that the world eats today. The potato came from us. The chocolate came from us, vanilla came from us, corn came from us. A lot of really important food staples that the whole world operates on are here because of the ingenuity of indigenous food scientists and ecological scientists. So I'm really about revitalizing those food systems and helping us to remember, even as indigenous peoples, that we have a lot to offer the world when it comes to regenerative food systems and anthropogenic foodscapes.
Thank you so much, Lyla. I appreciate your wisdom. And I would love to ask a direct question to you, which is, how can we better platform Indigenous voices and wisdom to lead us back into right relationship with our world as part of this regenerative movement?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, I find that, as you know, the relationships between Indigenous peoples and settler colonizing cultures, there's a lot of pain, right? As there probably should be expected to be after attempted genocide. So I think anti-racism training is really important. in that, I think all of our organizations could stand to have some anti-racism training, if for no other reason, to understand how people of color are feeling, how they are grappling with what they are experiencing, how their knowledge systems have been excluded and invalidated. And I do have a training available, which I can give to people, which is specifically how to be in solidarity with Indigenous nations. So I think the goal is to not only bring Indigenous voices into fora that is Eurocentric in nature, but also to bring Eurocentric peoples into the context of Indigenous peoples. And the way you enter those contexts obviously is very gently. And so there's certain protocols you do to enter them. But to not only bring Native people to speak at your conference or have them lead the opening prayer, but actually step into those Indigenous worlds ourselves and learn more as much as we can. And resisting the temptation to label Indigenous peoples as dysfunctional or primitive, because yes, we do have issues in our community. You might have some issues after 500 years of complete terrorism. And so, yeah, we have poverty, we have diabetes, we have alcoholism, all of these things that colonization gifted to us. So I think as you enter these communities, be patient, be understanding, and look for the gems and the beauty that still thrives within our communities, and go in with an open mind.
Thank you so much, Lyla. I appreciate your leadership and wisdom in this particular topic and area. It's very important as part of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I'd just like to take a little segue with our next question, which is, I'd love you to future vision with me. If we could jump to 2030 and then maybe even to 2040, what is the best case scenario if we've succeeded in regenerating our ecosystems and planet? If you could give me, you know, what can you see? What is the greater world that is possible, I guess, in 10 years' time and in 20 years' time? So I just would love to hear from any of you as to what your visioning is if we actually succeed in regeneration. Yeah, Amanda.
Great. So we actually just rekindled with the Buckminster Fuller Institute the Design Science Decade, which was something that Fuller created in the 60s, which is basically we have the potential to kind of retool humanity. He said, retool the world to work for 100% of life. And we've rekindled that for this decade and are kind of weaving together all these different narratives at BFI. And what we see is kind of this first kind of 5 2-year phases, the first of which we're in right now, which is like basically ideally some sort of truth and reconciliation. There's a lot of reconciling happening right now with this big global pause, and really asking people to go as deep as possible with that system's understanding. And then from there into kind of a restoration phase where we really, you know, do as much tree planting and also, you know, mass just ecosystem restoration and social justice restoration, restorative justice, and then also moving a lot of money in that phase. And then, you know, as we all know, the extreme weather is going to continue for a while, and as we're already exhibiting now, but we see it as this kind of third phase, a phase of resilience and coming together in the face of extreme hardship and building long-term resiliency and social infrastructure and mutual aid networks, as we're seeing now, as a response. And then we see kind of in the fourth phase, this regeneration, this wave of good news of like all of this effort that we've been putting in for so long kind of coming to fruition, and the emergence of all the beautiful intersectional work that so many people are doing, creating kind of a wave of good news. And then finally, our last phase being rejoicing of, you know, all that we have done over this decade. Yeah, and all of that sounds, you know, very kind of clear. Obviously, it's just a provocation for people to like think through what this could be and what the phases could be. And like we've all mentioned, I think it's really important to take the long view. You know, the United Nations says that there'll be about 1 billion climate refugees by the end of the century. which, you know, makes what we're going through right now look like training wheels. But we are training for a big shift, and how can we enable those displaced people to really have proper livelihood. So one of the projects that we're supporting with Buckminster Fuller Institute and our Regenerosity program is a program in Uganda that's helping displaced peoples there with permaculture gardens. And yeah, I'm really eager to see us kind of come together as humanity and make a good plan for what's coming. You know, there's a latency in the sea ice and stuff Jonathan Foley can speak to very well, of just like what's already baked in terms of climate change that we need to start preparing for. So I see a lot of potential benefit, and also just like facing what's happening over this next decade.
Thanks, Amanda. Across to you, John.
Yes, well, I think that what's interesting is that we have the ability and we have the need to practice. And ecosystem restoration camps is something that we've been seeing change the lives of people who didn't realize that they were connected or had the power to bring about enormous change. I would recommend that you study the camp in Paradise, California, which responded to the terrible disaster, and hundreds of people started to come and to participate, or to look at places in India or in East Africa or South Africa, various places around the world. And what we see is that if we build it, they will come. That if there's a infrastructure to do restoration and training in restoration, then thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions and billions of people will come, and we'll all be able to do what we need to do. That's what I would highly recommend.
Thanks, John. It's a beautiful vision. Osprey, across to you.
Yeah, I just actually wanted to echo a little bit of what Lyla June was saying, and to say that, you know, in the years to come, you know, one of the visions that I know we're holding is I would love to see Indigenous women running the world. And I say that very sincerely. I think that some of the most important voices that we need in leadership right now are Indigenous women, from the traditional ecological knowledge that they share, as well as their spiritual knowledge. We do know that 80% of the biodiversity that's left on Earth right now is in the lands and hands of Indigenous peoples worldwide, and there's a reason for that. And I don't want to just sort of skip that and check off that point. I think it's absolutely central to this conversation is all of us collecting around Indigenous rights right at the moment. As an example, you know, some of our work is in Ecuador and Brazil, where Indigenous people are under huge attack as they protect the Amazon rainforest. And our collective climate is very dependent on those ecosystems. And it's not just for that reason. We should be protecting Indigenous rights simply because Indigenous people have the right to live in their traditional way on their own territories, but also to understand that we are all engaged and complicit in what's happening with Indigenous lands wherever we are. And it's, you know, I think really paramount that we know the Indigenous peoples whose lands we're on and really support their struggles and their solutions. And, you know, I also do want to do a shout out to the women land defenders, especially in the Global South, who put their bodies on the line, are under constant threat for standing up for water, for the climate, for the forests. And, you know, not to be, you know, standing back in our privilege, not understanding those frontline fights, and that, you know, this is all of our responsibility to engage in that. And the last thing I'll say, because I know time is short, is, you know, protecting forests is key. Keeping fossil fuels in the ground if we're really going to have the future that is regenerative. And I want to take note that right at this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, when you look around the world right now, and studies and reports are showing this, countries that are led by women are responding far better than countries led by men. So I would just also note around climate studies and leadership in peacekeeping and in these crises, women are doing a very good job. And I would also just really note that put your energy behind the women. Thank you.
Thank you, Osprey. Across to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, these are Well, I'm actually very inspired by what everyone else has already said. So what I'm going to say probably be very mundane by comparison. But if I think about positive futures, I mean, first, I don't want to be part of the first human generation in history to deliberately and knowingly leave a degraded world to my descendants. But we're going to be if we don't change our ways. Our ancestors, regardless of which communities we come from, have all tried, maybe failed sometimes, to leave something like a better world for their children and their descendants. And we're miserably failing at that right now. And I hope that, maybe this COVID era or some kind of great awakening will somehow, change our ways to begin to realize we have to do better. That's why I have a lot of real interest in like the youth climate movement. We finally have a morally unassailable voice telling us, looking at adults saying, hey, you screwed up. You're leaving us a crappy world. And all they're asking is like, just listen to the science and do what's right. It's kind of hard to argue with that. But if you think, but I'm a scientist, so I try to think about like, the material kind of goals of what we need to meet in the next few decades. There are reasons to be somewhat hopeful. We may, before even the COVID epidemic, we may have been reaching peak emissions about now anyway. 50 countries in the world, including the United States and the UK, for example, have already had their peak emissions of greenhouse gases and have actually dramatically lowered them. The UK has lowered its emissions by over 40%, the US by over 15%, despite Donald Trump and Boris Johnson. So there are some good trends to build upon. But in this decade, maybe we can really begin to bend the curve on emissions. That still isn't enough. We have to bring them to zero and ultimately bend the curve on greenhouse gases and ecological destruction. But I'm beginning to see at least us tapping the brakes. We haven't stopped the harm yet, but we're beginning to tap those brakes. And I think that's important. We have to recognize that's not all bad news. There's a hell of a lot of it, but there is some good news out there. And I think we need that to keep us inspired, keep us motivated, keep us working. But in this decade, I think we could radically transform the energy system through massive deployment in energy efficiency, the incredible movement of renewables. Renewables are now cheaper than fossil fuels. We don't need subsidies. We don't need laws. We need money for renewables to start doing this. But we need good policy to start protecting our remaining ecosystems, to change the power dynamics that have led to their destruction. We need to change the way we think about agriculture. But we also need a second wave alongside that, like, again, stopping the bad stuff right now, slamming the brakes on that, and then planting the seeds for good things to unfold over the next 3 or 4 decades so we can reach that moment of drawdown, the moment of stopping climate change and reversing our ecological destruction. I think it can happen. We're also, I live near Silicon Valley, I don't pay a lot of attention to tech bros, but we do need a little bit of heroic technology, I think, maybe in the coming decades. Not much. Most of what we need, we already have. But it would be awfully nice to find a way to make steel and concrete and things that we're probably going to continue to use that don't need fossil fuels, that don't release CO2. But better yet, to kind of rethink through like biomimicry and other kinds of views, how we can emulate nature better in our own built environments. This is going to take a while, but I think these 3 phases of, stopping the bad stuff as quickly as possible, beginning the process of healing and regeneration, and maybe, allow the door to be open to some interesting technologies that could come in and help us along the way, but not to wait for them. One of the things we say a lot at Project Drawdown is now is better than new. And instead of tech, what we really need is time. So we've got to begin. And I hope we can and reverse that kind of awful legacy we're going to leave if we don't change our ways.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, and I'm just wondering, just to have a couple of words from each of you to close, just with any messages you'd like to give to our viewers for how they can be a part of this regenerative movement and what the world needs most right now. I'd love to start maybe with you, Amanda, if just a couple of closing words for our viewers.
Yeah, I think, it might not be probable to have this more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. There's so many forces against us, but I think the more of us know that it's possible, the more possible it becomes. And so just invite everyone to dream into that ultimate, essence of the future that you want, and share it as much as possible so that we can all weave our stories together and make it more possible. Thank you for having us all.
Thanks, Amanda. John, across to you. Any final words?
Did you say John? I'm sorry, the rain has really been very loud for a little bit here at Mount Shasta. I'm at Camp Hatlam, where restoration of forests are being studied here. And I think that, you know, as many people as want to should go camping. Let's go camping and restore a little bit of paradise every day, and let's work closely with the indigenous people and with the women who definitely were far advanced compared to the brutality of the people who try to come and change things. So thank you very much for having me. Let's go camping.
Thanks, John. Osprey, across to you.
I think what's really amazing about this moment is that there is an opening in the system. You know, this is a very epic moment. And this is actually a moment where new ideas can actually flourish. Even though I know I've been grief-stricken and heartbroken about so many things and how many people are hurting right now. And, you know, people losing their jobs, losing loved ones. I mean, this is a very dramatic moment. It's also a powerful moment to realize that we can, you know, unite together, we can collaborate together and understand that when there's a crack in the system is actually when transformation can occur. And so I would just really hold that this is our time to move, and let's move together in solidarity and seize this opportunity. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Osprey. Jonathan, across to you.
Yeah, I think I would echo something that I heard from Amanda a little bit is, you know, painting a picture of a better world. One of the things we lack so much right now is the right kind of vision and leadership. Too many of our leaders now are not leaders, they're bullies. They paint a picture of a broken world and then point fingers at who's to blame. That's not leadership. I think of leadership like, for example, Martin Luther King. He did not go around America saying, I have a nightmare. He talked about a dream where we pulled together and tried to do what we knew in our bones was the right thing. He paid for that dream with his life, and we're nowhere near done achieving his vision. But that kind of leadership saying, hey, look, a better world is actually possible. A better world is in our hands, and what we have to do is make a choice. Who are we? Who do we want to be? What kind of ancestors do we want to be seen as in the future? And give that gift of a better world to future generations, to people across the world we will never even meet. That's the best of who we can be. And I'd like to see us find the kinds of leadership within ourselves and across our communities and wherever to achieve that vision. But that's what's crucial is, you know, and you know, another great leader, Gandhi, my favorite quote of his is, anything that exists is possible. So let's go out there and make that possible, show that it exists, and paint a picture of a better world and fight like hell for it and invite others to join us.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jonathan. And Lyla, I'd love to close with you. Any final closing words that you'd like to share?
Well, going back to what I was saying before, I think a way that we can all be a part of the regenerative process is to shatter our conception of the meaning of food. Food is a strange word. It's a noun. It's secular. It's dead. And transform food back into a verb. Like in many cultures, food is a noun derived from a verb. And becoming more active in the dynamic processes of life around us that generate this thing called food. But in my language is chiyan, which means the energy that you eat. And so thinking about how can we really see that food is all around us? How can we really see that diversification of plant species and animal species is the only sane path forward? And remembering that we don't have to just plant gardens. We can plant forests that have a hyper dominance of edible plant species in them, as our ancestors have for millennia, not just native ancestors, but around the world. And also to think about ways that we can tend the soil again, to take care of her and to nourish her, just as those in the Amazon did for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, creating some of the most nutrient-dense soils in the world. And taking the time to learn, read, watch, and most importantly, to practice and become food again, and become a part of this flow of, some people call them calories, but you know, it's life. It's the process of life that we're a part of. And to work very hard, not just to feed ourselves as human beings, but to feed everything around us, and give back to her, and take time to make sure that the animals are taken care of as well. Because some say that is actually our job as human beings, is we were created with these big brains, actually not to take over the world, but to take care of the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lyla. And thank you, everybody. And yeah, I just want to echo that. I think, you know, it's all of our voices, all of our separate voices as part of the regenerative or solutions movement are necessary. All of our diversity is necessary. And, you know, what I'm witnessing personally, you know, as a witness, I guess more than an expert, is this need to find our place again in the web of life, and as stewards of the planet, to find right relationship again, to maybe step into an adult phase of human existence of learning to be stewards versus what we have been so far. So I greatly appreciate all of your time and energy and voices today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here at One Earth Live as part of Voices of the Regenerative Decade. Many thanks to our panelists, and yeah, we look forward to hosting you again for future events. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.